Um, Welcome. How's everybody doing? Great. So
Great.
thanks for joining. My name is Gino Canella. I'm an assistant professor at Emerson College, and I teach in the journalism department there. I teach documentary, multimedia, social media, in our senior capstone course for graduating students. So had a crash course in teaching online in spring semester, so hopefully I have some lessons learned that will make this course go smoothly for everybody. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we can do some introductions. I have kind of an exercise to sort of get us into the content, but also kind of hearing from each other just about your motivations for joining the class and your interests in the subject. And usually, I'm working with college students that are enrolled in our program that are taking my courses. So they're, the sort of why they're taking my classes. Sometimes just a little administrative. They need the credits. Whereas this is kind of like a open public class. So curious to hear about why you made it here. So yeah, this is me. In a previous life, I was a journalist. I worked in television news for about 8 years, a little bit in Ohio, South Carolina, and then Philadelphia, working for the ABC affiliate there as a special projects photojournalist. So, video, editing, producing, writing, that was kind of my background in TV news. I felt a little frustrated with the limitations of TV news, the format, the industry. So I decided to do some community media work, making documentaries with organizers, activists. So I kind of moved into that area of community media and looking at how organizers and community groups are using multimedia and social media to try to stitch together broader coalitions of people working on various campaigns, issues, policy, those kinds of things. And then I moved to Colorado, continued doing that work while I was in graduate school there. And now here I am at Emerson. I just finished my second year there. So I've been in Boston now for about 2 years. And I think some of these identities, inform the kind of work that I'm trying to do now. And maybe we'll talk about this kind of throughout the class tonight, just in terms of kind of research, science, journalism, sort of the blurring of boundaries around some of these different professions and fields. Journalists are researchers in some sense, but how can we think about the practices involved in some of these and the distinctions that are made oftentimes between a journalist and a filmmaker, an activist, a researcher, social scientist, and I'm kind of often asked to sort of pick a side, which one do you happen to be in this moment? So to kind of get us started, I just wanted to ask everybody, you should be able to annotate this, and I'm just going to create, should be able to create a blank page. Let me just get rid of this real quick. Okay. So you should have the ability to annotate. If you click on the annotate in the top of the screen, there's a little pencil there, and then it'll give you selections to choose a mouse, select tool, text, draw. So if you just choose the text and just click in there, I would just like everybody to maybe put down, if you can't access this, if you're on a phone or some other device that doesn't allow it or whatever, we can just have you kind of verbally write your response. But I just wanted everybody to kind of get us started with what is fake news, or, just how you understand it, and then what brought you to the class. Right? And so we can just take maybe about 5 minutes or so on this, or a little bit longer if folks need more time.
Do you want us to write it up here or where it says click to add notes?
Sure. You can add it sort of at the top there.
Okay.
Um, I'm not totally sure how to activate the typing tool.
Okay. So were you able to click annotate?
Annotate
At the top of the screen, there's
at the
new
top of the
share,
screen.
pause share, annotate.
Let me see.
Oh, yep.
Annotate. Is it in the menu bar?
It should be at the
It's at the top of the screen. If you're looking at the top of the screen in the center, you should be able to see that menu, and then just scroll down. It'll show you to
Okay.
hit annotate.
Okay.
Are you working on a computer?
Yes.
Yeah. So it should be in the top in the center.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Gino.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either.
Clay, I think I'm not sure what link you're looking for there.
So everyone that's trying to figure out how to go in and do the annotation option, go up to the top of your screen where your menu bar is, and it says View Options. So you select View Options and then scroll down from like Fit to Window Size, Exit Full Screen, and then it brings you to the Annotate option.
Oh yeah, sorry. It kind of automatically puts you in full screen when I share my screen.
Yes.
Thanks for that assist there.
Tanya, did you find it?
I did find it.
Okay.
Okay. And so where in that middle page is what you wanna, okay.
I'm still a bit lost. So like I'm in like full screen, but like where's the menu?
So it's at if you click down to where you can, what kind of a computer are you on? Bridget?
It's okay. Actually, why don't we just go ahead and get started with what we have up here. And then for those that are still kind of having trouble, we'll just kind of move into introductions and just kind of getting to know who's here, what your thoughts kind of are generally about the issue of fake news. So I'll just go ahead and start here with top left. Fake news is propaganda. This is from, I think, Betsy, right? Yep. Marketing communications for a mortgage company, currently writing about real estate, but more activist background in gun control, like legislative advocacy and political activism. And so what do you mean by propaganda? Can you say more about that?
Sure. I mean, I think what we're seeing today is a lot of the news is really manipulated. It's no longer, just reporting the facts or trying to have some unbiased opinion about something and letting the facts speak for themselves. Everybody's taking information and manipulating it and twisting it to meet their own ends. So, to me, it's a lot of it. You can take real news and make it propaganda, or you can create news and it becomes propaganda. So to me, that's sort of the umbrella. I think that's the way that it's being used negatively right now. And so that's.
Okay, great. Yeah, and we can talk about that. I think there's a lot of overlap here. And we can kind of define some of our terms with fake news, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. I think we kind of hear a lot of these terms kind of used interchangeably, but there are some fine, I think, distinctions between some of these. And then so Dana has fake news is not journalism, and you're an interactive designer, public advocate. Do you want to say more about fake news is not journalism? Is Dana still here? Nope. Was that some, I don't know, was that not somebody's name, Dana? Or did somebody else write that? Okay, so we can move on to Jake. Has here news stories that distort facts shamelessly, and you're enrolled with Dinja's 4-week class. So welcome, Jake. Do you want to say more about distorting the facts and the shameless characterization there? I think is interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I just tried to keep it simple. I mean, I guess when I think about fake news, I just think about like, you know, really lightly sourced, you know, extreme takes that often are on, you know, less than credible websites. But I think also, you know, you can see fake news in the mainstream media too when they fall for, you know, whatever bullshit. Yeah, I don't know. It happens. Could happen anywhere.
Okay. Okay, great. So I think that gives us some more to hopefully get into throughout the class. And yeah, what you can kind of look out for in terms of not being susceptible to fake news. So Tina here has fake news as a term that is used to define news that is not based on facts or actual events. The term itself is often misused. So could you say more about that and the misuse specifically?
Sure.
How you kind of hear it?
So like the first time I actually heard the term fake news, it was from, you know, the Trump administration themselves during the 2016 campaigns. It's the same thing with like alternative facts. The first time I heard that was also during like a Sunday news show from one of his people. So, but they used it to push a narrative that's like the opposite of what you saw either on the video or like the first-hand account, you know? So like you would be seeing one thing, like, you know, like with the guy, like it happened recently, the guy who got pushed over by the cop on the video, like everyone saw that video went viral, you know, like they saw from whoever's camera that came from what happened. Yet Trump described in his tweet like a totally inaccurate account. So that would be an example of fake news. But it's misused because the fake news is being characterized as real news from, you know, those people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unavoidable why we're having this conversation, and I think why the topic has gotten so much attention, I think, in the past 3 to 4 years. I think, you know, our president has done a lot to sort of weaponize the term against the press and against journalists and sort of give it this kind of amorphous meaning where it can be applied to various things. And, you know, there's also, I think, a little overlap here. We talked about propaganda, conspiracy theories. I think that is also sort of like part of this same family, and we're kind of seeing more and more of that. And we can kind of get into sort of some characteristics of conspiracy theories that may sort of tend to borrow some of fake news and misinformation. Okay, so finally we have on the screen here, and then we can hear from some other folks verbally. Clay is into pop culture and comics and just looking to learn more about writing and reporting. So welcome, Clay. Anything else you'd like to share about just kind of your conception of fake news and what's been talked about so far?
Yeah, just piggybacking on what the last speaker said, like around the election, I think I heard about the fake news term being used like on a Vox explainer video, and I'd never heard it before really. Okay. And how you know, the explainer says how like Trump uses that like something that started kind of on the left, and now he uses it as a weapon, even just saying fake news. And I'm just getting frustrated with like people that I know that are smart and choosing to ignore the facts and spreading misinformation. So I don't know. I just want to be more educated about these things.
Okay, great. Yeah, hopefully we can help with that. And then Shira or Shira.
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 Hi.
Welcome. And so you have fake news as information that is spread that misleads an audience and obscures actual facts or truth. And you're a freelance reporter. Anything else you care to say there about the sort of intent with it being used as a kind of misleading device to obscure facts?
Yeah. I guess I can think of an example of a time that I felt like I was running up against a situation like that. I once interviewed a police officer, and I had asked him how much of what kind of information is passed on to ICE if an immigrant makes a phone call to you, and that was a situation where they immediately became very cagey. And I guess that's an example of a time when I felt like there was a possibility of running up against a fake news situation.
Okay. Okay, great. So actual kind of personal experience there with this. And yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, just in terms of the ethics of working with certain agencies and law enforcement and other kinds of like public agencies with vulnerable communities.
Yeah.
So, okay, great. So Noni or Nani, hi, welcome. Can't hear you.
I have very bad connection. I live in Mattapan, and our Wi-Fi is sketchy. Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay. And my computer didn't allow. The only option I had was to go to full screen or not full screen. There was no other option, so I don't know how to type in.
Yeah, no problem.
I would say fake. Okay. I think fake news is not a term that I ever use because it's kind of part of the whole canceling thing. I think in the past people acknowledged that things were biased, and if they didn't know it was biased, we might have felt somewhat like I've been had sort of thing. But just because something was biased, it didn't mean there was nothing. It didn't mean there was nothing valuable about it.
Right.
Now I think that term just basically, it seems to me, it's kind of like anything someone doesn't want to hear or doesn't agree with. And it certainly has been co-opted to mean that.
Right.
I don't agree it's fake news. So I don't know that it has a meaning at all, but my interest in taking this was just to become a more discerning participant, like to have a better idea how to find information and how to gauge what other biases. And so completely not factual at all.
Right. Okay. Great. Thanks so much for joining. And yeah, that I think question of bias and objectivity is one that I think journalists have been wrestling with for generations. And now I think that biased news, unbiased news is kind of putting journalists in a tricky position because objectivity, like I said earlier in kind of my introduction as a journalist, activist, filmmaker, and researcher, I always am constantly trying to sort of encourage my students to be a little bit more critical about their biases and just recognizing them and reporting with them and through them, as opposed to pretending they don't exist and somehow they can sort of remove their whole person from the situation and report as some detached robot or cyborg. So yeah, that's a good point there on the objectivity that's kind of embedded within most traditional newsrooms. So yeah, so we can kind of move on quickly here and get some introductions from the rest of the class. Tanya, did you want to say a bit about why you joined?
I joined because I also do find that it's really difficult to figure out what actually is the truth.
Okay.
And I try, whenever I see a news article, I try to do a lot more research and look at many other sources to find that.
Okay.
And so it's just this interesting topic to me.
Mhm.
And I just find that in terms of what fake news is, I feel like a lot of times it's creating news to distort the truth to fit your political agenda or what you want people to see.
Mhm. Okay, great.
So,
Yeah, I think that question of truth is a big one that we can maybe touch on briefly. But yeah, I think trying to recognize that sometimes competing truths can coexist, and you can have contradictions, and that can be okay. It doesn't mean that there's one kind of absolute truth, and sometimes I think that's kind of on us as responsible news consumers to not want all the time to sort of like get to the absolute bottom of the matter, but just to recognize that things are kind of ongoing. We're kind of learning things, and it doesn't mean anybody's using information for nefarious purposes. It just means that the story is kind of incomplete. So yeah, that question of truth, I think, is a good one that fits in here a lot. And Bridget, welcome. Do you want to say a bit about your thoughts on the class and the concept?
Yeah, so my connection's a bit spotty, so
That's okay.
So I'm a high school student in Colorado, and I've actually been really interested in journalism for a while.
Mhm.
And Jason, I'm doing an internship with Big Boston, and Jason really recommended these classes, so that's why I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Welcome. And what part of Colorado?
I'm from Arvada, so.
Okay. Yep. Great. Yeah. So I went to CU Boulder for my graduate program, and
Yeah,
I lived there for a while. So yeah, I miss it out there. So it's good people.
Yeah,
Welcome.
definitely.
All right. And so we heard from Clay and Tina, and Jake. Who else? Mara? Did you want to share with us kind of who you are and what brought you out?
So I've been following this whole project for quite a while, since its inception.
Okay.
I read The Dig, and I went to college for journalism, and I worked in music for a really long time. So, but my current working situation is more in the beauty space, and I still pay attention to the news because I feel like when you are in it, you're really interested in kind of what's going on and what information is actually factual.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as what I think fake news is, I feel like fake news is designed almost like tabloid. It's supposed to create a reaction to kind of bring you one way or the other. And most people are not looking at they're not looking at fake news for the information. They're looking at fake news to express how they feel. It's not based on truth. It's based on the truth as they see it. And that's why they're using fake news to manipulate people. It's manipulating your emotions. It's manipulating how you will observe either a time period or a specific situation.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think a lot in there that we can talk about throughout the class there in terms of manipulation, using fake news for political purposes. I think that kind of gets us back a bit to our point about propaganda and fake news, kind of blurring the lines between propaganda, conspiracy theories. So yeah, the objectives I think that I had for the class that I think align well with kind of what you shared in terms of what you're kind of aiming to do here and sort of think about and question were, threefold. What is fake news? So we kind of started getting some basic definitions going and some thoughts going about how we kind of individually see it. How are journalists responding to it? And how should they? So should you acknowledge fake news? Should you sort of respond to people that sort of call you fake? What does that kind of mean for journalists that are trying to maintain their credibility, their authority as a sort of quality source of news and information? I think those are tough questions that I think a lot of people in the field are struggling with in terms of sort of amplifying fake news and disinformation, false content, but also challenging it and calling it out. And does that sunlight sort of act as a disinfectant, or does that sort of give fuel to the fire and kind of add oxygen to the misinformation? And so then what can you do? Just some practical kind of takeaways and tools that you can use just kind of in your everyday kind of reading, listening, watching news. That you can, I think, do to sort of be better at sort of spotting fake news and being more discerning about the kind of sources of information that you prefer. And so we talked about our definitions, and these are some that I have. So, fake news for me is false content. It's just made up, fabricated information presented as news with the intention to deliberately mislead the reader for political, social, or cultural purposes. And that was mentioned by a number of you who kind of talked about sort of the propaganda and the sort of, weaponizing information for political purposes. So that intent, I think, is difficult to sort of pin down, to sort of know somebody's intent for why they're kind of spreading the information. Cannot be as easy to sort of get a handle on, which kind of then gets into misinformation, which is the accidental spread of incorrect information or false content. And so I think, journalists, I think fairly do spread misinformation. But I think the accidental part of it is the part that we need to acknowledge, and that journalists, when they do sort of get caught on their mistake, run a correction, try to get out ahead of it, do better, sort of put protocols in place that prevent that from happening in the future, more editorial oversight, those kinds of things. But it happens. So I think that's just kind of the distinction that I try to draw between false content or disinformation. I can kind of use those terms interchangeably, and then misinformation. Any sort of thoughts or sort of quarrels, comments, issues with kind of those definitions? Any agreement or maybe revisions? So, the false information, disinformation, we've seen campaigns, and there have been plenty of, news stories, books written about this, where you have sort of a hub of sort of people working, sort of creating websites, creating false news stories. So it's meant to look, so presented as news, I think, is a critical kind of like segment in that definition. So it has to kind of look like news. Maybe, documentaries, I think, are also kind of an interesting genre here that is sort of blurring some boundaries here between propaganda, news, journalism, public relations. And so presenting it as news, what do you sort of like look for? What kind of characteristics do you look for in a news story? Because I think there's a lot of evidence to show that people increasingly have a harder time distinguishing news and journalism from just media and content, because everything is kind of the way that we're accessing our information. It's all kind of sort of smashed together. When you're scrolling through Instagram, you see individual journalists, you see newsrooms like Dig Boston, you see sort of public officials, city governments have their own Instagram feeds. So you have all of these kinds of actors that are working within these platforms to produce news and information, but sort of how do you kind of conceive of like news, in what characteristics do you think a news story has that maybe something like that, something that's non-news would be missing?
I guess a news story would usually have some level of objectivity. It wouldn't have people's sort of personal opinions or biases coming into it.
Okay, yeah, so we kind of talked about that question of objectivity and how journalists are kind of wrestling with that question, dealing with sort of trying to remain detached from the story or the issue. So yeah, a level of editorializing, I think, would be one way to say that. Just if there's a real sort of like forceful effort on the part of the author to insert their analysis, then that might sort of slide out of the kind of news category in your sort of view. And that can sort of vary from person to person in terms of what their comfort level is on being able to sort of like distinguish that editorializing, analyzing from sort of the facts and the information. Any other thoughts about sort of what characteristics you think news stories have, or how you try to sort of make the distinction between, you know, just an influencer on Twitter and like a journalist or a news organization that's presenting a sort of news story?
I mean, I think if you go old school journalism, it's the 5 W's, you know, the who, what, when, where, and why.
Uh-huh.
And then having some sort of authority that you're quoting to sort of back up whatever the statement is, or, you know, to give it some credibility, I guess, in what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. And that's sort of like a key point that we'll kind of keep coming back to, is this question of source. You know, who's the source? Like, not only the source of the information, like where it's coming from, the name of the website, the news organization itself, like check the source, but also the sources within the story. You know, who did the journalist talk with? And then who is that person? You know, I think a lot of times I feel frustrated when I see people reporting, and just like, I've seen a lot of this in the recent demonstrations and protests, is that like people say is often quoted as a source, or like analysts say, or sources tell me. And I just really find it hard to sort of nail down who is saying this, like who did you talk to? And I think if you're trying to do really good, solid journalism, I mean, there's a time and a place for confidentiality if you want to use anonymous sources. But in general, I think you really need to sort of like show your homework and show sort of like what you did to sort of get original content. And, you know, it could be your observations, your notes, your documentation of events, you know, visually or otherwise, to describe what's happening. But I think that's something that I kind of find lacking a lot, is just like, what's the source? Bridget, did you want to say something?
You all kind of covered what I was saying. I was going to say
Okay.
source. So.
Okay, great. So any other kind of ideas there for what folks do to kind of distinguish a news story? Yeah, so I think those are all good points there. So we can move along here. I just kind of have a little bit of a background here on fake news, and just sort of set us in context that this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. If you kind of go back, you know, to this photo here in the 60s, this is a photo of John Kerry with Jane Fonda speaking to Vietnam veterans at an anti-war rally. Has anyone seen this image? Yeah, Betsy?
No.
Clay? Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay. So if we kind of scroll down, we'll see, you know, this is a sort of composition of two images kind of stitched together. So I think, you know, technology is playing an important part in thinking about the evolution of fake news as, you know, Photoshop and software programs, computer programs, AI, machine learning gets smarter and smarter and more sophisticated. I think we're seeing more of these photoshopped faked images. But I just wanted to show a few examples to say that, this is not entirely a new phenomenon, that the form may be taking a different, maybe looking a little different. And so this is one from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They were attempting to showcase the diverse enrollment of their university, but in order to do so, they had to Photoshop in a African-American student in the background here.
Wow.
And so this was from 1993, 94. So the original photograph is on my right. I don't know if this is mirrored on your side with the students here kind of raising their fists. And then the altered image is on the left here with the Wisconsin text banner above and the little date for the undergraduate application. So the photo was taken in 1994, a year after this photo from the football game. And so when you talk about like sort of spreading false content or disinformation, like this was clearly intentionally done. This wasn't an accident. So that's kind of why I distinguish, like, misinformation is, I think, more prevalent, but it can be just as dangerous, but it's not sort of done with the same kind of intent. And so here, what would the intention be, thinking about persuading for, political, cultural, other kinds of motivations.
As someone who does marketing for a living, it's kind of interesting to me because, I mean, obviously you have to have your standards in marketing, and that is not okay. Mm-hmm. But it's, what's that distinction between marketing versus journalism, where, part of marketing is to try and manipulate people in a way, mm-hmm. to buy something or to believe something. Mm-hmm. Versus journalism, which is, you're actually reporting or should be reporting what's actually happening in the news. So it's it's an interesting balance, or it's an interesting, not a balance, but like, how they're different from each other, I guess, and again, not that, you shouldn't be lying or in your marketing either, which is to me, in essence, what they're doing. But there's a lot of cleverness in marketing that is about sort of manipulating what's going on and manipulating the viewer or the buyer or whoever your audience is in a way. And but I don't, I see that as very different from the role of journalism, which is educating and informing. So I don't know, it's kind of funny to me. It makes me think about that, like,
Yeah, no, there are sort of endless examples, and I'll just kind of switch to show you just one more here. So this is from Time Magazine. They have a collection here, a slideshow with various historical photographs that were photojournalism, but doctored. And so this is one from 1970, the shooting at Kent State. So it's kind of strange because you have to do a little bit of detective work, but there's not a lot of great software available out there to sort of like run a photo through to sort of see if it's been doctored. There's some, but it's a little difficult, especially just for sort of the average person and to the naked eye. And so, there's nothing really egregious about this in terms of like what was taken out. But if you look at this is wrong direction. So if you look at the original, then you see this post in the background. And it just kind of looks bad, as a photographer. You kind of want that clean image, especially the way that the lady has, this expression, your attention goes directly to her. And then it just kind of, it doesn't make the background as nice and clean. But it's just something you can't do. And when you think about journalistic standards, is you are manipulating the viewer to sort of see that scene in a different way than it was actually presented when the time that shutter was clicked. And there are, a bunch of other examples here. And people have lost, pretty prestigious prizes in journalism. for, it later being revealed that their images were faked. This is the Beatles cover of Abbey Road, and this is the sort of final version, and then you see the original. So Cigarette was taken out down here from the hand. So, just even those little kinds of details, like what you want the viewer to see, I think says something about your values as a journalist and your values as a news organization, and how accurate you want to be in terms of like reflecting that. And this is a pretty bad one from 1994 that is showed in most, I think, photojournalism classes. So doctoring the images, the one on my right, the Time magazine cover, An American Tragedy, and then the Newsweek cover, Trail of Blood. So this is from 1994. So, just making the image darker. So, colors, I think, can do a lot to convey mood, sort of tone to people. Blues are like a cooler color. So if you're trying to sort of make the image kind of sort of lighter or feel like, it kind of emits a feel, colors do. So I think that's important to sort of keep an eye on when kind of looking at, like, again, what's the motivation? What's the intent? So in terms of intent here, what would Time magazine's intention be in sort of publishing the image in this form? Or the photo editor's intention be in the way that they sort of photoshopped it?
Well, with the color making it darker, it kind of to more of an ominous effect. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Which leads the reader to believe that, oh, that's an ominous character. Like it's adding to the mysterious kind of dark image.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I think that's all true. I think it's creating a mood of kind of danger, darkness, amplifying the stereotype of, dangerous black man. So, there are very heavy kind of racialized tones going on there. So Jake left a comment here if I have read Errol Morris's Believing is Seeing, and I have not, but that sounds like a good recommendation. Do you want to say more about that? Or just kind of your thoughts on kind of how this fits in?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a book I read kind of recently. If people don't know, Errol Morris is a documentary filmmaker who's made a number of really amazing movies. One being Thin Blue Line, which is a great film relevant for today's time, where it's about a man that was wrongly convicted of shooting a police officer. And it talks about, he fully investigates these things like such an amazing way. And he's just an amazing documentarian. And he wrote this book recently about the nature of photography and basically just how much we think that photography tells an obvious story, but photography by nature of like sort of setting a frame always excludes something, and then therefore sort of like it's always sort of an editorial decision. And he goes into these sort of like famous stories of that involve issues like Gino was just talking about, of cases where people thought that famous iconic photographs throughout history that people thought were like manipulated to tell a certain story. And he sort of investigates whether or not they were manipulated, what it means if they were manipulated. And it's just a really, really great book. And
yeah, I think it speaks to a lot, photo manipulation and thinking about altering. And, the same is true for language, for words. You're trying to sort of paint a picture of a scene for readers. And so the way that you're sort of like, you're shaping that scene with the language that you use, I think says a lot about sort of the impression that people are left with, how they think about people, places, issues. All of those editorial decisions really sort of matter for also collective memory, like how we think about our recent past and also sort of our distant past. So yeah, that's kind of a quick sort of run through of sort of background on fake news being with us for quite some time and it taking various shapes and forms. But why is it being talked about now? We've kind of touched on some of these. So information is power. What do I mean by that? Like, how is information power, or how is information used as power?
It justifies decisions.
Okay.
Make an argument for
Mhm.
just choices people.
Okay, so it's sometimes used as in an argumentative way to sort of justify decisions, or sort of you need to have some sort of explanatory power behind what's happening. Any other thoughts? How you see?
For me, it immediately brings up the question, is this the word information? How do you know whether that information is true?
Yeah.
So it could be powerful for the person who's putting that out
Mhm.
in terms of manipulating, but it just goes back to earlier what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough point in terms of how do you know the information being put out is true? If you're talking with someone, you're talking with me, sort of, there's a level of trust that I think has to go on. And I read a book recently that talked about, as humans, we've kind of evolved to have like a truth default. We kind of default to believing things that people tell us. But I think a couple things that, I tried to do consciously in this class, in terms of my introduction, kind of telling you a little bit about my background, telling you who I am, telling you where I work. I think those facts, I think I was trying to sort of establish my credibility as an expert on the topic, or just as somebody who's interested in this topic and was happy to join you all and lead us in a discussion about it. So yeah, that question of like, what do you choose to believe is a really deep sort of philosophical one that I think, is sort of part of this broader conversation about fake news and truth. So how else to,
I guess. Oh.
Tanya,
I think my only way around that in terms of finding out if it's truth, and even then I'm not totally sure, is by finding many sources and seeing whether it all comes together with very similar, basis of what they're trying to communicate.
Right.
And hopefully that's it. But also being open to other possibilities in that.
Right. Yeah. Trying to connect the dots, I think, is a good approach. Shira?
Shira, yeah, I guess I would say information is powerful because it creates more transparency, meaning there's more awareness and understanding amongst the people who are receiving the news.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think transparency is one that a lot of journalists, I think, have been talking about recently, and letting people in on the process and sharing their notes, making their data sets open access. If they have a large sort of, spreadsheet with quantitative data, making that available for download, I think is a way to sort of let people in, and sort of give themselves some power in the conversation, in that we are sort of agreeing to trust them. And that those first couple points there, I think, blend together a bit in discrediting journalists and mainstream journalism. So, journalists kind of try to operate with a level of authority. Betsy, did you have a comment there about information is power?
It was sort of the same thing, that it's just, it's educating people and revealing things that people should know, need to know, want to know at its best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, educating people. It's so that in that sense is kind of like maybe thinking about it in terms of like empowering others to sort of, be more, media literate, or think critically about their civic engagement, those kinds of questions, being an active participant in society. Any other thoughts there about that point there? So there's a concept called soft power, hard power and soft power. So hard power is kind of brute force and sort of, military might. You kind of see, countries, people, institutions kind of wage hard power in various ways. And information as power, I kind of put that in the soft power category because there's this kind of, there I think are increasingly sort of a realization on the part of different nation states that sort of trying to sort of capture people's attention is a form of political power. Just to sort of control the narrative and shape the story is a way for certain actors, institutions, states to sort of maintain their grip on power. So you see it through information, but what is the quality of that information? Is it outright fake? Is it misinformation? Sometimes it's just flooding the zone with as much information as possible in as many different directions. And it's up to you to sort of sort through all that and sort of try to track down, maybe these over here are fake. I did all my research. And then by the time you're done, it took you 2 months to work on one news story. And it's like everybody has kind of moved on. So in that sense, I think information is being used for states, actors to kind of maintain their grip on power or try to sort of steal power from people they perceive to have some of it. So, we talked about this, discrediting journalists and mainstream journalism. So just attacking the press, attacking the news media as a way to sort of, again, sort of maintain your authority as the kind of ultimate decider, the sort of final say on the issue. And that, if you sort of knock journalists down, discredit their institutions, their practices, their publications, then that will sort of start to erode that trust that sort of journalists rely on in order to sort of do their work. They need you to sort of like be okay with them sort of like sourcing this information. And then finally, sort of networked news and digital technologies, which I kind of mentioned a minute ago, sort of how technologies are sort of increasing and amplifying this in a way that I think we haven't quite seen before. And network news kind of talking about sort of the news ecosystems in which we get most of our content and what they're doing to sort of like shape our experiences. So this is a more recent one. So this is kind of like one of those photo hunt games that you see like at the bar where you have to like pick out what's fake. So is this fake or not? And how do you know?
The shadow in the background, she has no poster.
Great, excellent. So we got some savvy observers here. Yes, so if I can zoom in here. So the shadow is missing a poster. So yeah, that was kind of an easy one, but good work, Maura, on spotting that. So yeah, photoshopped in the sign. Pretty decent job. I mean, it's pretty quick Photoshop, but kind of chopped off the hand a little bit there. That's not like how would you would need to grip the poster like with your finger. So that's not there, but what else might sort of like raise a red flag for you if you came across this post?
Location.
Sorry?
Location. Like she's in front of a car. It almost looks like an airport. Like why would, just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like context.
Why would these people care?
There, right.
Okay, yeah, so that could be one. Yeah, location. So, why is this person not at a demonstration? That would be where you would expect to see somebody with this kind of a sign. Great, and any other comments? or things you thought? So, you know, we kind of talked about source. So the 20K as like the account name,
Oh, yeah.
that's kind of fake. I mean, or that would be something that I would kind of go to as like, that's not a person. And 20K is like not a news organization. It's not verified. So, you know, that was also one thing that I noticed.
I think I would immediately go up to the person's name, Kendall Jenner, and kind of research that. Who is this person?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so that's kind of an interesting strategy there too, in terms of posting it. So you can tag people or organizations by kind of sort of putting the at symbol and then writing their name. So that will tag them on the post. Some people have their privacy settings, so they have to approve being tagged in a post. But like a lot of celebrities, you can tag them on the post and then with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So it's sort of like a little bit of savvy on this person's part, whoever posted it, in terms of knowing sort of like how social media works and trying to sort of plug into existing conversations and hashtags and hoping this sort of like ends up on people's feeds, which it did because a friend saw it and took a screenshot and sent it to me. So it's like obviously circulating to some extent. Any other thoughts about this or comments on this? So Nani has a comment here about confirmation bias, which I think is also kind of true here about what we're looking at here in the Facebook post and social media. Tends to lean toward white males. We can see numerous recent examples of women and POC not being believed unless someone steps in to back them up. And so do you want to say more about confirmation bias, Noni, or what you kind of like, how you kind of see that kind of fitting in with sort of the white male privilege?
My link, my computer keeps telling me I have a bad link, so I
Oh.
don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear.
It just comes down to so much what we think about is how do we know what to believe,
Mhm.
and it does seem that there's this. I mean, I've read a little bit about it. There's this assumption that we all we want to believe. That's why people get scammed. That's why people, get into situations where they believe things that everyone else would look at them and say, how on earth could they believe that? But it actually, it doesn't seem to be across the board to me, because there's lots of news recently that would indicate that even with pictures, even with what would think of as facts, people's stories are not accepted as real. So it's just, I don't know, it just complicates it more when we talk, like speaking to someone about a story we've read. If their bias is somewhat, I don't know, it sort of naturally goes to believing who they think of as the authority. So it's just really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if I could sort of, stress one thing that I would like you all to take away is just be skeptical, but have a healthy skepticism. I think there's a level of skepticism that starts to kind of veer into conspiracy thinking, in that you don't know what to believe and everything's fake and everything's sort of a conspiracy. But I think you can sort of operate with a level of healthy skepticism that you question sort of why you believe what you believe. Why are you inclined to sort of share this article over that article? Why are you inclined to sort of challenge or fight with this this news show or this journalist? Like what about your sort of personal beliefs, your biases, your sort of like perspective and personal history is sort of coming in to sort of compel you to sort of respond in that way. And I think that's a healthy thing to do. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but just sort of be mindful of it and think about, what is it that is sort of like encouraging you to lean so heavily in this direction when it comes to political news, for example. I think is one where it's like hard to sort of like find good quality reporting that sort of actually challenges you. And I think when you are confronted with that, it makes you, I think, makes you think harder about why you believe what you believe. So I would say, yeah, don't avoid information that challenges you. You know, if it's well researched, if it's correct, if it's factual, you know, I think there's a place for competing, you know, competing truths and debates about sort of, you know, which set of facts should we sort of prioritize. And sometimes that's a better question to ask, not about sort of like which facts are there, but like which facts are not there. Any other thoughts or comments kind of about this or the confirmation bias points? Great. So yeah, with technology, you know, deepfakes are one that I haven't really seen much in terms of academic literature related to journalism on this. But I think this is kind of like starting to come sort of like down the pike in a more mainstream way. Has anyone seen this video with Jordan Peele and former President Obama? No?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so what happens there, Clay, if you want to just kind of give us a brief kind of recap?
To be honest, I forget, but I remember seeing it.
That's okay. Yeah, I can try to pull it up here. So does everyone know what a deep fake is?
Isn't it like using someone's image in a different, you know, so, and they have a way of creating it, you know, sort of like an Uber photoshopping so that you can create a person and make them be somewhere they're not or on something they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the technology essentially is, this is another story here from Vox Media on their YouTube channel. And I can show this quickly, just a short excerpt from it because it's a bit of a longer piece. And I can try to make
How
these
did you
available.
first find out that there were...
Sorry. I can make these links available later if folks want to try to check these out. But, you know, this story is one that I was kind of taken aback by because, you know, they talked about the fact that deepfakes actually pose a much more serious problem outside of politics in terms of creating fakes of us. You know, this is a story about deepfakes being used against women in porn. So Kristen Bell, is a famous actor. There was a deepfake of her. She didn't realize it was out there, but somebody told her husband. And then he said, hey, do you know there's a deepfake of you like in porn? And she was like kind of shocked and horrified. But it basically uses and stitches together images from your face. And then it can sort of shape it when it puts it into the software. And I can show this because it does a better job of explaining it with the visual if you kind of see how it sort of like reads the images and kind of learns your face.
And first photoshopped them into nude images, then graduated to deepfake videos. What's happening in these videos is a specific kind of digital manipulation, and it's unlike older face-swapping filters you might have used. Those tools let you put your face into your friend's head, but you still controlled it, a sort of video Photoshop, transferring both your facial features and your expressions. But deepfakes can take the facial features alone and animate that face with the expressions of someone else.
The truth is like, yeah.
This is what makes deepfake porn videos so invasive. The creator takes away a victim's control of her own face and uses it for something she never wanted. Transferring just the mask of someone's facial features requires training a piece of software called an autoencoder on hundreds of images of the same face from different angles and in different lighting with different expressions until it learns what they all have in common. That volume of images has long been available of celebrities, but increasingly it exists of anyone.
if you're someone not even with a very intense social media presence, but just a presence online, you have a few pictures, maybe there's a video of you from, you know, a party or something like this. You have so many training images to take from that. At the moment, you do still need a fair bit of data to make a convincing deepfake. But as the technology is improving, we're needing less data, and the tools are becoming increasingly accessible and user-friendly.
Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of a sort of like look at sort of the software and how it works, how it kind of runs through all of the data and tries to stitch your face onto somebody else's body in a moving image, which is like, it kind of, you know, blows my mind when I think about that. Just like putting someone's face on another photograph is one thing, but putting their face, moving it and sort of making it move with the other sort of frames in the video, I think is like kind of terrifying. Any thoughts, or have folks seen things like this or heard of deepfakes? Some people mentioned having heard of the Jordan Peele Obama case. So there aren't any sort of like major high-profile cases of people making a deep fake of a political leader, for example, of like a foreign president. For you know, some kind of like political purposes or something. But you know, I could envision that happening at some point, and that was kind of what I was sort of alluding to when I talk about information as power, sort of trying to sort of shape the narrative, control the story. Putting out information to sort of redirect, control people's attention is oftentimes more valuable than what they know, is just the fact that they're distracted and not able to be as like sort of present and engaged. And then the other kind of sort of technology that I kind of wanted to touch on here is machine learning and AI with text. So not just with photos and videos, but also this faking of text. So if anyone uses Gmail, you know that they have been rolling out in the past roughly a year or so this predictive text. So when you're typing to somebody and you'll say, I will, and it sort of starts to fill in light gray, see you soon. And then you can just hit tab over and it'll keep going. So it's learning sort of how we write, how we talk. But then people are sort of using these models to create stories. And they're a little rough now. I mean, they don't make a lot of sense. It's just kind of gibberish with, you know, a cat went to the store and hung out with a horse and bought some cabbage. It's just kind of words. But it's getting smarter, and it's starting to put together stories that would be more fiction, you know, stuff you would see more in a novel. But again, I think sort of trying to sort of look at down the road, you know, near future, 3, 5, 7 years, like how will this sort of play into creating news and writing news stories? There are already algorithms that are being used to sort of craft sort of very short blurbs, kind of like AP Wire style stories that just include that basic information. This happened, you know, it knows the sort of traditional journalistic style of putting together a lead. And so you're kind of starting to see more of this kind of creep in. And this is, I think, going to be another sort of contributing factor to what we're going to have to sort of like wrestle with in our information environments. Any other thoughts here about sort of the predictive text? And then Dig Boston left a comment here. Jason, I don't know if you have any thoughts or want to share. There's a documentary version on YouTube of Ways of Seeing. Great, thanks. Okay. Yeah, so, you know, we've kind of talked about this a bit, networked news and filter bubbles. So confirmation bias is sort of exacerbated by what people call filter bubbles. Does anybody know what that term means, or what that would, you know, how you would sort of think of it? Or the algorithmic sort of qualifier there. So, you know, people have talked a lot and written about algorithms endlessly. So algorithms are essentially sort of computer code that tells the software to do something. So a person has to sort of create that code. So the algorithm in terms of the filter bubble is how our news feeds are sort of created for us and with our help, because we're inputting data every time we log on and click and interact and do things. It's learning more and more about our habits and our preferences. So when you're clicking on news stories that you tend to agree with, the algorithm learns that. It is more inclined to give you more content that's like that. And so you kind of get stuck in this bubble that has been sort of curated by you, but also by the algorithm and the social media platform, to sort of, you know, agree with your tastes. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if all you're doing is getting your news from social media, I think you're going to have a very sort of narrow view on what's going on. I think sometimes when I log on to Twitter, I think like the world is on fire, which, like, I mean, honestly, I think, to be fair, I think it kind of is in some ways. But I think it's healthy to kind of step away from those and think about like how those are just giving you a very sort of limited slice, because the way they're designed. These platforms, their goal is to sort of keep you on the page as long as possible. So they're driven by, you know, financial motivations to keep you clicking. The longer you're on the page, the more opportunity they have to sort of give you ads, to give you more content, to give you more of this. So, you know, there's a sort of very deliberate effort to sort of keep you plugged in, to keep you hooked, to keep you stuck on the page. So I think it's just important to sort of think about sort of where you find yourself within the filter, within the bubble, sort of what else is next to you, what's kind of adjacent, what's kind of clear across on the other side. So do people here get most of their news from social media, or would you say that's kind of like a primary way of kind of finding out what's going on in the world for folks?
I like a Twitter list of news organizations that I like to follow, and then I go read it on the outlet website.
Okay, great. So following news organizations, their kind of official Twitter feed is one way. Clay tries to sort of curate his social media feed, and making a list, I think, is also a good one with like news. You know, you can have a news list, you can have a sort of culture list, a politics list, maybe keeping them separate. So you have like separate bubbles. So they're not all sort of like colliding in your main area. Any other strategies or thoughts for how you use?
I mean, I'm old school. I still get the Globe and the New York Times delivered
Okay.
in print. So
Great. Yeah. I mean, it's a much slower experience. I just subscribed to the Globe recently, and I think I was finding myself sort of like during the sort of initial weeks of quarantine feeling very isolated and confused and stressed, and wanting some like, I don't know, reliable information that I can just like, okay, I can just spend like 30 minutes reading a bunch of stories, and I'll get the PDF version online. And I think it's just like a very old way of doing news, but it's like a way that I felt like I could sort of like take some control and slow things down, because I thought the speed was just becoming like more and more unmanageable. Sorry for the shout out on the Globe. I did make a donation to Binge, so always important to support independent media as well and alternative news outlets. Any other thoughts about just kind of strategies for relying on social media or going to other sources for news and information, radio, podcasts? No? Okay, great. So just wanted to talk about this article that I read recently in The Atlantic that talks about a study that was done by some researchers over at MIT looking at why fake news spreads. And, you know, this study, they analyzed over 126,000 stories, retweeted by 3 million users over 10 years time. So it was, I think, from the inception of Twitter to 2016, looked at a 10-year span. And then they found that the truth simply cannot compete with hoax and rumor. By every metric, falsehood consistently dominates the truth on Twitter. They found, and fake news and false rumors reach more people, penetrate deeper into the social network, and spread much faster than actual stories. And so I think a couple things were interesting there. So they talked about, you know, how fake news spreads deeper into the social network, and that kind of gets us back to that sort of drawing of, you know, how networked news works. So if a celebrity shares a news story or someone with a large following shares a story, it'll spike and it'll get a lot of traffic. But if it sort of spreads sort of more organically, with the help of bots too, potentially, then it sort of starts to get a broader kind of reach across the network, and those slow kind of like 10 retweets, 5 shares, 5 shares. It's kind of like what everybody has kind of been talking about recently with the COVID-19 and the exponential growth. And so sort of trying to stop the spread, I think, is also applicable here to thinking about networks and how, you know, if you share it with, you know, 3 people and they share it with 3 people, that kind of exponential multiplication factor starts to get out of hand pretty quickly. They created an algorithm to do this, just to kind of give you a little bit more background here on the actual study itself. So they created what they called a truth machine, so an algorithm that was sorting through tweets, pulling out the facts most likely to be accurate, and it focused on 3 attributes of a given tweet, which I just kind of pulled out here. And this kind of gets to, you know, this question of truth and, you know, what is true. And they looked at the properties of the author. So was the person verified? The kind of language used. So was it sophisticated? And then how a given tweet propagated through the network. So was it kind of a spike, or was it one of those kind of broad, sort of deeper penetrating across the network kind of tweets? So what they say is that, you know, generally false claims from ordinary users have depth, only 12% of Americans are on Twitter. So that, I think, is also sort of helping us understand like the way fake news spreads on this one platform. That's a limitation of the study. They kind of argue and make the case that it could be sort of applicable to Facebook and YouTube and Instagram because of the same sort of incentive structures and sort of algorithmic tools that are applied are relatively similar. But then I think on the question of why a tweet spreads or why a fake tweet spreads, like why do you share content online or with like your social media feeds? Like what sort of compels you to sort of click that share? So, you know, I think one of the things they found here was that, you know, fake tweets were novel, so they were unique. You know, news that kind of gets shared, and marketing research has kind of looked at this a lot, and they kind of consistently find that people share news that is kind of unique and novel and sort of like surprising. And then also things that tend to elicit some kind of like strong emotional reaction. And it doesn't actually matter whether it's a positive reaction or a negative reaction. I think the thing that has been found to be true is that the sort of the intensity of the reaction is more important than sort of like what the reaction is. So if it's like outrage, surprise, sort of like joy, if it's a really intense feeling, if it's just kind of like kind of happy, but like not super excited happy, that sort of is what they found to be sort of reasons for sharing. So interesting, novel, unique, but then also this sort of like emotional sort of resonance that the post has. Does that kind of jive with, so Betsy says to get a reaction. So how do you mean you try to like get a reaction from people in your network when you share something? You kind of try to elicit like a debate or a discussion?
Or even acknowledgement. I mean, it's just you want people to acknowledge whatever it is, like it, react to it, share it, respond to it. So, you're just trying to get people to react in some way to what you posted versus if you just post something and nothing happens,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, I think there's always that kind of incentive there to sort of know that people are following you, people are connected. You're not just kind of like posting things into the void. So that kind of expectation of, interaction with an actual person is something that I think is a motivating factor for a lot of times. I'll share something is, trying to get something going or just some acknowledgement. Any other thoughts there about kind of
a validation and to open up discussion?
Okay, great. Yeah, so trying to get validation and opening up discussion, I think always relevant to posting. So New York Times did an interesting piece here on looking at Plandemic. Has anyone seen this documentary? Plandemic. So it was basically a fake documentary. I mean, I don't know how to characterize it. I don't know if they actually did in their article. Okay. Oh, sorry. I skipped. Mara said sharing something on social media to engage a conversation. So similar there to Betsy and Tanya. So yeah, Plandemic was a documentary that was spreading conspiracy theories about the pandemic and saying that it was planned. So the pun, Plandemic, it was planned for, I actually don't know really, some political conspiracy to do something. So anyway, they just kind of tracked here how this spread and sort of what compelled it to sort of move through social networks. And they used a program that I'll sort of bring up later and show everybody just quickly how to use as a way to sort of like help you think about sort of like how things are sort of bouncing around the internet, articles, videos, different things. So it was shared on May 5th by QAnon, which is kind of a conspiracy theory breeding ground chat room forum on May 5th. And then it was shared shortly after by a doctor, Dr. Northrup, who had developed a following after appearances as a medical expert on Oprah. And she had previously expressed misgivings about vaccines. And so this kind of gave it some legitimacy and some authority. This is a medical sort of person with a degree, with some credentials that's sharing. And then it kind of moved into Reopening America groups. An MMA fighter posted it. So it's kind of starting to get that depth. It's getting the celebrity sort of posts, the people with large followings. It's getting those bounces. But it's also kind of in these Facebook groups that's starting to give it that more organic reach with the QAnon groups, the Reopen America groups. and tapping into different kinds of like political ideologies in order to sort of start to see the sort of big spike about 1 week after it was first posted. And then after that, Melissa Atkinson, anti-Obamacare campaigner, posted the video to her 20,000 followers on Facebook and said, if you watch anything, all caps, anything on my page, it needs to be this. And then the following day on May 7th, BuzzFeed finally kind of reached into the sort of mainstream discourse, and mainstream journalists were kind of compelled to cover the story and debunk it. And they just basically took apart all of its claims and falsehoods, and then said in one of the first signs that the mainstream news media had noticed the video, BuzzFeed wrote this article. It was shared on 63 Facebook pages, including Occupy Democrats, a popular left-wing group, according to the Times analysis. So the BuzzFeed article, I think, came sort of right around here, if you can see my cursor, like roughly around 1 week, which then kind of like forced it to plateau. And then that also finally led Facebook and YouTube to remove the video or place warnings on the content. So you see social media companies are sort of straddling this line between how much responsibility they have in policing false content, conspiracy theories. Is it kind of a game of whack-a-mole that once you sort of take down a video, it's just going to be copied endlessly and sort of pop up in different spaces and different chat rooms, forums, WhatsApps. So, you know, this was kind of how one particular case study peaked and spread through some of these sort of the breadth and depth that the MIT researchers were finding. Any thoughts or questions, comments about that pandemic? Betsy?
Yeah, I'm just, you know, when something like BuzzFeed, when somebody finally steps in and tries to debunk or refute something, my natural inclination is to think that like the debunking never really gets the depth of the actual first article. I mean, how effective is it, I guess is what I'm saying. I mean, you do it, and does it really work? And
right. Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, a really difficult question, I think, and that kind of gets me into the sort of second phase. We're kind of running a little short. So I'll just play a quick clip here to sort of like build on Betsy's comment, and then we can chat about it, about what journalists should do, how they should respond. And this is a clip from, I think, last year or the year before, from Anderson Cooper. He was covering a hurricane, and I'll just kind of play it.
I rarely respond to online.
Oh, sorry.
I rarely respond to online conspiracy theorists or cable news cranks looking to get into a mutually beneficial beef that'll boost their ratings. I try not to argue with other TV anchors, and I usually let conspiracy theorists go unanswered. For years, Alex Jones claimed that I didn't go to Sandy Hook after the shootings there, and claimed an interview I did with a grieving mother was instead done in front of a green screen in a studio somewhere with a crisis actor. I never really understood the logic of that one. I mean, I spend hours on planes each week flying all over the place to cover stories. Why wouldn't I drive 2 hours to cover an important story like the murders in Newtown? Recently, I saw another online conspiracy theorist claim that the little boy I helped in Haiti who'd been struck in the head with a piece of concrete in a mob was actually a little child I was using as a human shield to protect myself. I really don't even know what to say to that ridiculous idea. Now, over the weekend, however, the son of the president, Donnie Jr., tweeted out this picture of me in waist-high water, my camera crew a few feet away on higher ground in only a little bit of water. Donnie Jr. was claiming it showed me in Florence faking the depths of floodwaters in order to somehow harm his father. And I quote from his tweet, "Stop lying to try to make @real Donald Trump look bad," he wrote. A guy named Gavin J. Smith, who I've never heard of, formerly with the Trump presidential campaign, tweeted, quote, "Absolutely disgraceful. Apparently Hurricane Florence wasn't devastating enough for CNN's Anderson Cooper, so he had to exaggerate for his live shot. Fake news at its finest." Now the picture has popped up in very...
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut it off there, but I think that kind of gives you enough to sort of maybe have a discussion about. So essentially he went on to that's about a 9-minute clip. which is pretty lengthy, you know, for a 1-hour news show. Anderson Cooper's show on CNN is 60 minutes. You take out the commercials, most shows that have commercials are about 42 minutes. So 9 minutes is 25% of the show, substantial portion. So why dedicate 9 minutes of your show to debunking tweets and showing, correcting the record on that? So, you know, what would you do in that instance if you were a journalist reporting at a hurricane, a disaster, and somebody is tweeting a photo and saying that this is fake and that didn't happen, you're just trying to make my dad look bad, fake news. Like what do you do there? You check it, you know, do you sort of let other people try to handle it? I mean, just you is just like, doesn't have to be like, this is my recommendation for all journalists. It's just like, what is your sort of inclination to do is like defending your work and defending your sort of credibility and your authority?
That's kind of the question, right? Because you could spend all day, you know, Anderson Cooper could probably have a full-time staff that would just be there refuting, you know, whatever disinformation they're trying to spread. And so, you know, is that what we have to do? Or, I mean, or do you do what it seems like he does, is just sort of cherry pick one that seems really egregious and go after that? You know, I mean, and you know, part of it is protecting his own integrity, and again, that relationship with his audience and the truth. Mm-hmm. We need to protect that. Mm-hmm. But there's also this part of it where, like, people, again, it's the confirmation bias, right? People are going to believe what they're going to believe. Are you going to spend all your time trying to educate the people that want to believe the worst of you? So I don't know what the answer is, actually.
Yeah, it's tough. Any other thoughts there on what Betsy has said? I think, yeah, I mean, you could spend your entire show and your entire career sort of debunking what other people have said about you or your reporting. But then it doesn't leave you much time to do actual journalism. And then also, I think you have to ask yourself, who is this intended for? You know, are the people that are sharing the conspiracy theories, you know, the Alex Joneses, the Trump Juniors, the people on Twitter, are they watching this show? Are they watching this video if it gets posted on Twitter and reshared? Or is it more of kind of like inside baseball kind of, you know, for journalists, people that are interested in journalism, people that kind of tend to be more left-leaning, are kind of anti-Trumpers, you know? So I think that's another question you have to think about if you're sort of like doing this to sort of defend your honor, to defend your credibility and your journalistic standards. I think that's fine, but also kind of recognizing that limitation there about once it's already out, correcting the untruth can sometimes be next to impossible. So yeah, I mean, one strategy, just as far as, you know, strategies that have been proposed by academics, one is what's called a truth sandwich, which basically means you kind of lead with the truth. You kind of put the false part in the middle, and then you follow it up with more truth. So you could say something like, you know, hydroxychloroquine is not sort of recommended, and I don't know the science on this, so I'm just sort of like, bear with me on this example, but is not a recommended treatment for COVID-19. President Trump has talked about using hydroxychloroquine, and then I'm not sure how you would correct that with another truth at the end. So it's essentially stating this is not recommended by science, by what we know, the experts have said to be true. However, this is what was said that is false, and this is, again, let me remind you of the truth. And so, you know, I've talked with various journalists about that. Some say it's a little bit too generous, like why even post, why even publish the falsehood? But then I think it again gets to the source. You know, if this is coming from a very prominent person, you know, the president has a huge platform reaching millions and millions of people on social media, at press conferences, other kinds of like media appearances. So it's out there. So is it sort of, are you sort of dodging your journalistic responsibility by not sort of providing people with the correct information? And that's a tough one. I mean, this was a really sort of like heated debate, I think, a few months ago when every network was airing the sort of task force briefings live, sort of end to end. And there was a lot of misinformation that was being spread through those. And then finally, news organizations kind of started scaling back a little bit, maybe just, you know, putting them on their YouTube channels or their websites, letting people stream it there if they want to. You know, you can't stop people from like finding information. Like they're eventually going to get it, but it's a matter of like, do you use your platform for sort of amplifying that? Or is the correction an amplification? So Noni says here, what about closing with the truth that Donald Trump is not a scientist or a doctor? It's related, but not repetitive. Yeah, so that could be one strategy, to sort of stress, again, the sort of the science and what we know from medical experts and public health officials. Yeah, so that could be one way to try it. Try to sort of reinforce his level of expertise on the issue, which is low. So yeah, here are some things what you can do. So check your source, cross-check sources. I think a lot of you are doing this already. Who's the author? What's the source in terms of the outlet? So the publication. Snopes and PolitiFact are good ones to check out, just for looking at like debunking conspiracy theories. And then I just want to switch here to show you here. So CrowdTangle is this kind of interesting plugin here. If you use Google Chrome, there's a plugin for it that, sorry, I'm trying to juggle windows here. So it's just on this sort of top right-hand corner, it's a little CT in a black box. So you just have to like download the plugin and install it. And if you just go to crowdtangle.com, yeah, it'll take you to it and it'll show you sort of like case studies. There's a video for you to sort of like look at. There's a paid version that like news organizations can pay and use. I assume the Times use the paid version, but I mean, the Chrome extension is just as good and it kind of gives you a quick snapshot of where things are coming from. So this is just that page here. But this is the story about the MIT study on fake news and how falsehood spread on Twitter. And so if you click this, it'll just kind of pull up this little interactions page and shows you top referrals. So 102,000 shares plus on Facebook, the number of interactions, likes, laughs, love, comments. And then it gives you this tab section here where you can go from different platforms. So who shared it on Twitter and when, and then Reddit and Instagram. So
who's that giving you though? Who cares who shared it? Why is that important?
So it's not important in terms of like validating the information that's in the actual story, but I think it'll just give you a sense of where you are situated sort of within your network of news. So, and also kind of like how things are kind of making their way around networks. So if you did a CrowdTangle and pulled up the referrals and interactions on, let's say, the Plandemic documentary, and you saw that it was kind of coming and most of the top referrals were from QAnon people, and then you're like, I don't know what that is, and then you do some research, find out what that is, then you look at this doctor who's kind of been an anti-vaxxer that was made famous by being on Oprah, then you start to put things together like, okay, maybe this is not quite so legitimate. If like this is kind of like how it's making its way around social media, what kinds of people and groups are amplifying the story. Does that kind of help in terms of sort of how this might be just a tool?
Yes. So, but are these other sources also talking about the article to give their version of what they think they're?
It depends. Like, so these ones on Twitter or Facebook, sorry, are shared by the Atlantic's sort of main Facebook page. And then you have Coffee Party USA, Stop the Anti-Science Movement, so Dead State. And you can kind of click on, so, and then you kind of start to see like, okay, these are like Media Literacy Council, Science Project. So yeah, people, you know, really interested in science, anti-fascism, National Communications Association, Americans for Bernie. So then you can click on like Stop Trump and Americans for Bernie, like the link, and it'll take you to the post. And then you can see like if they shared some comments about it. So they just say, you know, an important but thoroughly depressing read. Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. Jonathan Swift once wrote. So, you know, they just kind of provide a little bit of extra comment about the actual study. And then you can see if you kind of want to keep going further and further down this like rabbit hole, connect the dots, you know, who's sharing it from the Bernie page. And then that'll kind of give you this link and you can see if they made any comments, who are these people. They might just be, you know, just average everyday people on Facebook.
So how do you not get overwhelmed by this, by going down that rabbit hole? How do you, I guess you just have to have a place where you just stop and put up a boundary. Okay, I found out enough information, other sources. So easy to go down the rabbit hole. 3 hours later, you're like, oh my God, what was I trying to find out?
Yeah, no, I mean, hopefully you'll get better. I think you'll start to develop, I think, muscle memory about sort of identifying what's fake and what's not based on sort of, yeah, sorry, Bridget, it's called CrowdTangle. Yeah, and just, if you just Google CrowdTangle or crowdtangle.com. Yeah, I think you'll get savvier at sort of knowing some of this language about, you know, what are conspiracy groups, what kind of interactions are starting to look a little bit kind of like inauthentic or inorganic, you know, like what's being sort of like referred by kind of the same people over and over or by fake accounts. So I think, yeah, I think over time, hopefully you'll just kind of start to develop a little bit more, yeah, literacy by being immersed in it. So one thing I found, this was a fun article that I found about the Taiwanese government is using humor as a tool against coronavirus hoaxes. So I've seen a lot about sort of how misinformation is being used in this moment because we are so isolated and we're relying so much on, you know, social media and like digital connections or connections that are mediated through technology for our information. So that is kind of like ripe environment for conspiracies to spread about both the coronavirus pandemic and also the kind of more recent the Black Lives Matter and the protests and demonstrations. And so this one I thought was kind of interesting. So a kind of former social media influencer who kind of was a sort of made her name as a civic hacker during the Sunflower Movement of 2014 is now working as the digital minister of Taiwan, which I thought was an interesting position that like, maybe we should have a digital minister to help us like navigate all of this stuff. explained how humor over rumor has been their sort of like tactic at sort of defusing fake news and conspiracy theories. And they make these kind of funny memes. Like this one was made about toilet paper hoarding, and it says we have only one pair of buttocks, as like kind of the way to sort of like get people talking about it, especially like thinking about younger demographics and how people interact with TikTok and Instagram and these more like visual sort of oriented platforms that are more like quick hit, things. Like a lot of people don't sort of click through or click the link in bio, like that's the story. So sort of trying to sort of use that meme language to sort of like debunk things. And then this dog here, the spokes dog, about washing your hands. So I think that's one strategy that has been, they're experimented with to sort of how do you fight fake news? Do you try to combat it? What do you say about it? So just trying to switch back over to the PowerPoint. Any thoughts about whether you think that would be effective for combating fake news? Some of what we've kind of seen here, like in the US specifically, in dealing with fake news, and whether, younger audiences would be prone to kind of thinking about memes and humor. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know if there's a lot of sort of like evidence to support, what they're doing in terms of trying to sort of talk with their citizens about, how they find the program to be successful or effective or not. So, all of these points I think we've talked about. So be skeptical, healthy skepticism, check your biases, where am I coming from? Why am I inclined to fight with this article? Log off, check out a social media for a little bit, try to read a newspaper, get some slow news. Think about the source. Again, not the source of the article or the author or the news organization, but the actual data, the evidence, like what is the source? Read the story, go beyond the headlines. I think that's kind of an easy one, but unfortunately, NPR did an experiment where they posted outrageous headline on Facebook, and the comments kind of went wild with people sort of debating, I can't believe this is like total like liberal tears and all this kind of stuff. And then like if you actually clicked on the story, it kind of took you to a page with like a clown, and like it was like, hey, you made it to the story. So they proved in a sort of small anecdotal way that like people generally sort of don't click on and read the actual story. They just kind of want to get into an argument. So read the story, and then also get to know journalists, like develop relationships with journalists, do journalism. I think a lot of that can help sort of demystify sort of the process of how news gets made. And I think you'll come to have a sort of deeper respect for what journalists do to sort of get information and put it together in a story that's like sort of trying to provide context and help people make sense of really complicated issues. And we've got a couple comments in the chat. Yeah. We've got a couple journalists on the call, so you can exchange information here, get to know each other, become friends. So yeah, finally, I just kind of wanted to offer some resources. So these are some books that I've read recently that have kind of helped me think about a lot of this. Post-Truth, I think, is a really good one for looking at sort of truth and beliefs and sort of coming more from like an epistemological standpoint. So how do we know what we know? So epistemology is kind of based on sort of like, what are our methods? So how do we collect knowledge and study things? Like, how does science work? the misinformation age, network propaganda are somewhat similar in terms of thinking about sort of the sort of current moment, why the sort of subtitle on the misinformation age is how false beliefs spread. So kind of looking at that case study from the New York Times and CrowdTangle on the pandemic, that's kind of a sort of book length version, both that and the network propaganda. That one is manipulation, disinformation, and radicalization in American politics. So yeah, definitely some rabbit holes to go into if you want to go into this rabbit hole, I think is a good one. This is not propaganda, Peter Pomerantsev. That one actually is great. He kind of does like a global look at sort of information campaigns and information warfare with like bots and fake news farms that are all over the place, just creating false news and spreading it on social media. Like it's literally people's jobs to sit in a room and create fake websites and come up with fabricated news. We saw this in 2016. For as much as, you know, people were sort of hand-wringing about Russia, there was actual like fake news coming from other parts of the world, creating stories like the Pope endorses Trump or something, I think was one of them. So that's a pretty sobering look at this sort of scope and the scale on a global level, and then how propaganda works. He actually has another one, I think, how fascism works, Jason Stanley. So that one's a good one, thinking about sort of media, propaganda, and politics. And then, so Jason shared Skype, we all love hugs. Oh, so that was kind of like with that humor over rumor. Show your softer side in Skype chat. Great. Yeah, so that's kind of it, and we're just kind of at time there. Again, I can try to put these links and such together in some sort of like PDF or something that then Jason can email out to the group. And that's my email if anybody wants to contact me or reach out, have any follow-up questions. Happy to chat more. And my Twitter at @GinoCanella_. So that's kind of it. Any closing thoughts or comments or questions for the class? Hopefully I gave you some good sort of practical tips and things that you can do kind of, you know, immediately to deal with this, but also kind of a broader overview of sort of how we got here and what's going on. Just kind of knowing the sort of landscape, I think, is helpful for kind of knowing where you find yourself within this space. So yeah, I mean, it's tricky and there are no easy answers or no good answers. And I think it'll continue to get more and more challenging for journalists and news consumers, people that are interested in good quality information, facts, the truth. So yeah, any closing comments or thoughts, questions? No? So, okay, we can kind of leave it there. Since I want to be respectful of your time. Thanks for the comments there in the chat. We appreciate that, Clay. Bridget, Betsy, Shira, I'll get your name right eventually. Yoni, Mara, and Jason. So yeah, thanks everybody, really appreciate it. Good luck in the course if you're working on the 4-week course with Jason and Chris on producing journalism. So, you know, this is kind of part of the news initiative that we're working on with the Somerville Media, or the Neighborhood News School. Sorry if I'm butchering all the names here, Jason. But so this is kind of part of the Somerville News Garden, which is kind of the umbrella thing that we're trying to work on here and work on getting started to sort of wrestle with this issue of news gardens and local municipalities not having any news or sort of public information, good public service journalism that's kind of covering infrastructure, zoning, city council, education, school boards, all that kind of stuff. So like this is kind of part of that larger initiative to sort of try to get people interested and involved. And so if you see anything, if you're following Dig and Binge on Twitter, Facebook, other things, like we're kind of, you know, encouraging everybody to get involved as much as you're able. And also just to kind of meet folks in the area that are interested in news and learning about journalism and how journalism works, and do some kind of, you know, journalism education and media literacy education with people. So yeah, that's kind of part of this. So please stay connected. We'd love to see you around at various meetings, events, things of that nature. So thanks again, everybody. And yeah, have a great night and take care and be smart out there. Good luck sourcing news. Bye.